March 1972. The South China Sea. The sky was shrouded in smoke, not from a storm, but from war. Across the gray surface of the water moved a steel mountain, the aircraft carrier USS Resolute. 92,000 tons of steel, 3 runways, nearly 100 aircraft. A symbol of America's power in Southeast Asia. For some, it was a floating city, for others, an instrument of occupation. The command called it the invisible fist. Hundreds of miles of operational range, an entire army on deck. Every morning, its deck awoke to the roar of jet engines, dozens of Phantom II fighters launching toward Hanoi. For the crew, it was routine. For those beneath them, judgment. But the Resolute had arrived too late. The war was already drawing to a close. America was looking for a way out, not victory. Still, it remained a symbol, proof that the United States had not yet given up. And that alone made it a target. Deep beneath the ground in North Vietnam, in a concrete bunker, sat Major Tran Quang Nia, a former sailor, now commander of a special coastal sabotage unit. He did not believe in gods, but he believed in retribution. Behind him, on the wall, hung a faded photograph of his brother, killed during the American bombing of Haiphong. On his desk lay a map. Circled in red was the location where the American fleet planned to refuel. The operation was called Silent Water. Its purpose was simple, to strike not at people, but at a symbol. His unit had at its disposal 2 Soviet-made Piranha-class mini-submarines, delivered overland and assembled in secret docks in Honggai Bay. They were tiny, less than 30 meters long, a crew of 4, but each carried 6 self-guided torpedoes. Nia knew the chances of survival were slim. But if the mission succeeded, America would lose more than a ship, it would lose face. Meanwhile, aboard the Resolute, everything went according to schedule. The ship's commander, Captain Jonathan Reed, was an old-school officer, a Korean War veteran, dry, precise, disciplined. His voice never rose, yet every word sounded like an order. He believed in machines, not in luck. His ship was a masterpiece of engineering, from radar systems to anti-submarine helicopters. But behind the facade of perfect discipline lurked exhaustion. 6 months without rotation. Heat, humidity, sweat, and the stench of kerosene. Pilots slept 3 hours a night. On the stern, near the helicopter barrier, sailors even joked, "If this war doesn't end soon, we'll drown from exhaustion." The ship sailed on, unaware it was already in someone's crosshairs. Night of March 14th to 15th. 2340. Darkness. The South China Sea was smooth as oil. 40 miles to the north, 80 meters below the surface, moved a shadow, the submarine Kai Linh. The forward compartment smelled of diesel and sweat. The crew said nothing. On the sonar screen, a dull, rhythmic pulse, propeller beats, steady and confident. It was the Resolute. Major Nia watched the depth gauge needle. He knew the ship was moving fast, 18 knots. To get closer would mean death, but retreat was not an option. Distance, 4,000 meters. Prepare for firing, Tube 1. Torpedoes, ready. 16 minutes. That was all that remained, to enter history or vanish. Aboard the Resolute, the night watch carried on as usual. Mechanics checked aircraft. Pilots joked in the smoking room. Radio operators intercepted fragments of enemy transmissions. And only at the sonar station did one operator, Seaman Second Class Andrew Kelly, notice something strange. A faint, uneven sound, like a second shadow following the hull. Bridge, sonar control. Possible underwater contact. Roger that. Continue monitoring. A minute later, the noise was gone. The operator shrugged and turned back to his screen. 3 minutes later, he was dead. 003. The submarine Kai Lin fired. 6 silver darts shot upward, leaving trails of bubbles behind. The commander didn't even have to say, "Fire at will," it was already done. 2 minutes later, the first torpedoes found their mark. The first explosion struck midship, the second, nearer the bow. The metal let out a deep animal howl. The ship convulsed like a living creature. Flames erupted from the deck. Fuel tanks beneath Deck 3 ignited instantly. The third explosion tore open the port side near the engine room. Power failed. The ship went blind. In the engine compartment, technician Donald Ross managed only to shout, "Valve," before a wall of steam engulfed him. Pressure ruptured the bulkheads. Water flooded in. On the bridge, Captain Reed stood his ground to the end. He didn't yet know the attack hadn't come from the air, the radars were silent. So was the radio. He just kept repeating one phrase. "Hold course. Hold the damn course." Within 10 minutes, the ship lost steering. The mighty aircraft carrier once thought unsinkable became a massive burning platform. The fires were uncontrollable. The deck cracked, fuel spilled across the waves, turning the sea into a mirror of flame. 6 miles away, the escort ships, USS Henderson and USS Calvert, saw the flashes but couldn't understand what was happening. Resolute's radio was dead. By the time they approached, the carrier was burning from bow to stern. Of the 5,200 crew members, more than 2,000 were trapped below decks. Temperatures in some compartments reached 600 degrees Celsius. Captain Reed refused to abandon the bridge. His final entry in the ship's log was brief. "If we go down, let them at least know, it wasn't a mistake that killed us. It was our faith in our own invulnerability." 047. The USS Resolute slowly heeled to starboard. Minutes later, it slipped beneath the surface, leaving only a patch of burning kerosene behind. The waves closed. The sea was silent again. South China Sea. March 15, 1972. 3:15. The sea was burning. The destroyers USS Henderson and USS Calvert drifted along the edge of a blazing oil slick, the place where the aircraft carrier Resolute had stood just hours before. A thick shroud of black smoke hung above the water, and only the rare flashes of foaming kerosene reflected in the waves like the breath of some enormous beast dying in the dark. They were pulling survivors from the water, exhausted, burned, silent. No one screamed. In their eyes there was no panic, only fatigue and disbelief. One sailor kept repeating, staring at the dark sea. "It couldn't have sunk. We were too big." At the Subic Bay Naval Base in the Philippines, the rescued were met with silence. Reporters demanded answers, but the Navy's press office issued only a brief statement. On the night of March 15, the aircraft carrier USS Resolute was lost as a result of a catastrophic internal explosion. The causes are under investigation. No mention of torpedoes. No submarines. Only an explosion. Admiral Thomas Kelvin, commander of the Pacific Fleet, received direct orders from Washington: total secrecy. In the midst of peace talks with Hanoi, admitting that a massive American carrier had been sunk by a North Vietnamese submarine would have been a diplomatic disaster. Official reports cited a possible fuel leak, an electrical short, a ventilation system failure. But the engineers knew, none of these could have caused such a perfectly timed chain of detonations. In his private notes, Admiral Kelvin wrote, "I've seen ships die from fire, storms, mines. But Resolute, this isn't just a loss. It's a mirror held up to ourselves. We stopped listening to the sea. Meanwhile, 120 miles from the site of the disaster, another story unfolded beneath the waves. The submarine Kai Linh was making its way home. Its hull was scarred, batteries nearly drained, the air in the compartments turning poisonous. Only 3 men were still alive. One sailor had died during the second salvo, when the hull began to leak. Major Tran Quang Nia sat in the captain's chair, staring at the dim compass. They had achieved the impossible, they had sunk America's largest warship in the region. But there was no joy. Only cold. "Commander, batteries are almost gone. The radio's dead. Then we'll stay silent to the end." When the sub reached the shallows near the coast, Nia ordered the crew to abandon ship. He stayed behind to scuttle the Kai Linh. His final journal entry read, "If anyone finds these words, know that we did not kill for revenge. We only reminded the ocean that it belongs to everyone. Even to those without aircraft carriers." The submarine was never found. A month after the disaster, a commission convened at the Pentagon. In a windowless room sat naval officers, engineers, and CIA representatives. On the screen, a blueprint of the Resolute, crossed out with a red line. Rear Admiral Baxter opened the report. "Gentlemen, we've lost a ship worth nearly $1 billion. 3,100 dead. And not a single confirmed sign of enemy attack. That's impossible." One naval intelligence analyst quietly replied, "Maybe that's precisely why it happened." Navy engineers who examined fragments recovered from the seabed found hull pieces marked with the unmistakable signature of an external blast, not an internal one. But the report was never published. By autumn 1972, no one spoke of the Resolute. Newspapers wrote about peace negotiations, troop withdrawals, elections. Only in Norfolk, in a small memorial hall at the Naval Academy, appeared a modest plaque. USS Resolute, CVN 62, lost in the line of duty. March 15, 1972. No cause. No explanation. No story. For widows and families, it meant silence. For sailors, a warning. No one wanted to remember the ship that wasn't supposed to be on the casualty list. 20 years passed. In 1992, a former Vietnamese fisherman living on the Quang Ninh coast showed journalists a strange find, a chunk of metal hull with the letters Resolute. He claimed the sea had thrown it ashore after a violent storm. The story resurfaced in Western media. Navy veterans began to speak of Resolute again. That same year, part of the archives was declassified. Among them was a report from a naval intelligence analyst. It read, "Acoustic data recorded at the time of Resolute's destruction matched the signatures of Soviet Set-65 torpedoes. However, no direct evidence links the attack to Vietnam. Today, no model of the Resolute stands in any U.S. military museum. Only in the Naval Academy archive sits a dust-covered model labeled Experimental Project, 1971. But among old-school sailors, her name is still spoken in whispers. They call her the ship that believed too much in its own steel. For some, she's a reminder of the fragility of technology. For others, a symbol of how war erases the pride of both sides. Old sonar operator Andrew Kelly, one of the few survivors, died in 1999 in Montgomery. In his diary, a single line was found. "When Resolute burned, I heard no screams, no orders. Only a hum. As if the sea itself sighed. Maybe it was just tired of carrying us. And the sea was tired. It took within itself the aircraft carrier, the mini-submarine, hundreds of bodies, thousands of stories, and one shared delusion. That strength is measured in tons, not in understanding. For Vietnam, the USS Resolute became what the Bismarck was for Germany, and the Shenandoah for Japan. Not merely a ship, but a boundary between eras. When the last navigator looked up at the sunset, he finally understood. From now on, the one who rules the sea is not he who builds the largest ships, but he who knows how to wait in silence. Archival footage. Black and white frames. The sea. A thin line of smoke on the horizon. A calm narrator's voice speaks off-screen. On March 15, 1972, in the South China Sea, the largest American aircraft carrier vanished. It wasn't attacked by planes. No ships fired. It was sunk by silence. The film flickers. The hum of the projector fills the room. Faces appear, weary, wrinkled. Former sailors of the Resolute. These men do not like to remember that night. They say it feels as if it all happened in another world, where time moved slower, and the sound of the ocean was louder. When asked what they remember, they don't speak of explosions or fear, but of silence, the kind that comes just after a scream. A world where even the waves were afraid to make a sound. Lieutenant Martin Sloan, the ship's navigator at the time, told a journalist in 1985. At some point I thought we were already dead. Because I couldn't hear anything. No people, no machines, no sea. It was like the heart of the ocean had stopped beating. The USS Resolute was not built for victory. It was built as a symbol, of presence, of control. America wanted to show it could still command the skies over Indochina. But control is an illusion. Back then, engineers believed in armor, in steel, in electronics, in radar. But they forgot that all of it was only an extension of human hands. And when those hands grow tired, when faith turns into habit, even the perfect machine begins to rot from within. Resolute was the pinnacle of engineering. And that is precisely what made it vulnerable. Vietnam never officially acknowledged Operation Silent Water. And there was no one left to do so. All who took part were either dead or lost among nameless coastal units. But in the 1980s, a Soviet archivist discovered a report on the transfer of P-3 class mini-submarines. And on the training of Vietnamese crews in Sevastopol. At the bottom was a note from an instructor. 4 crews trained. All fanatics. Not all will return. When a reporter later asked a veteran of the North Vietnamese Navy why they had done it, he simply said, "Not for victory. For balance. We needed to show we could strike those who believed they were untouchable." Every great catastrophe of the 20th century shares one thing: certainty. Titanic. Bismarck. Shenandoah. Resolute. All were born of the same idea: we will build what cannot sink. But the sea does not believe in human theories. It does not recognize flags, technology, or faith. It does not care what alloy the hull is made from. It only waits for man to forget that water is always stronger. Resolute was the last major American carrier lost in combat. After her, the Navy changed forever. Electronic defense systems, satellite reconnaissance, drones. All born from one fear. The fear of an unseen enemy rising from below, in complete darkness. When a ship dies, it takes more than lives with it. It takes memories, photographs, letters, notes. All left behind beneath layers of silt where even light cannot reach. In 1973, divers found the wreck of the Resolute at a depth of 4,000 meters. She lay on her side, like a sleeping giant. The flight deck was still intact, aircraft still in place. It seemed the ship was simply waiting to be called to battle once more. One of the divers later confessed. When I lit the bow with my lamp, it felt like it was looking at me. Not accusing, not weeping, just looking. As if asking, why? Every empire leaves behind ghosts. For America, that ghost was Resolute. Not because of the loss, but because of what it meant. She didn't die before the eyes of the enemy, but in absolute isolation, where even radio waves could not reach the sky. It was a pure death, without witnesses, without heroism. That is why no films were made, no songs were written. She was forgotten deliberately, so no one would be reminded that sometimes the defeated are those who believe themselves invincible. Now, if you sail to the coordinates of her sinking, the sea is calm. Where once oil and steel burned, fishermen drift in their boats. They cast their nets over the abyss, not knowing that beneath them sleeps an aircraft carrier. Sometimes, sonar picks up strange echoes, rhythmic, steady, like the faint hum of propellers. Sailors joke that it's Resolute, still holding her course. Others remain silent. The ocean does not like being spoken of loudly. It keeps its stories as secrets that must not be told. In 2010, on the coast of Virginia, a small memorial was unveiled. A concrete stele with a plaque that reads, USS Resolute, CVN 62. We believed in the sky, but forgot the sea. Beside it stands a bell. Each year, on March 15th, it rings 3 times. For those who died. For those who stayed silent. And for those who still wait for their return. No orchestras. No flags. No parades. Only the wind and the sound of the surf. Because nothing sounds louder than memory spoken in a whisper. Historians still argue about what truly caused the carrier's death. Some say torpedoes. Others, a chain reaction in the fuel tanks. Still others, human error. But perhaps Captain Reed was right when he left his final note in the log. It was faith in our own invulnerability that killed us. Every era writes its own epitaphs. For the 20th century, they were ships. Huge, proud, and meaningless. Imagine, night, sea, and somewhere below the surface. A giant ship still moving. No lights. No radio. No crew. Only metal and darkness. It moves slowly, unaware it has long been dead. Its propellers still spin in the memory of those who survived. Its sirens still echo in the dreams of those who saw that night's fire. And perhaps someday, someone will hear that echo again. Not as a sound of fear, but as a reminder. No machine is eternal. Even the ocean can stay silent, until it decides to remind us it's alive. The camera rises. The sea is calm, flat, cold. On the screen, a date, March 15, 1972. A single heartbeat. Then silence. White text on a black background. No one saw it sink. But everyone felt when faith disappeared. Then, silence. Long and deep, like the sea itself.